In this video, I'm going to show you how I completely remodeled my garden from start to finish, changing all the plants and grass and building a space with a pergola, a wooden table, and even a water mist system so you never get hot in that area in the summer. When I moved a few years ago, this was the state of my garden. The truth is that I thought it was nice, and I'm sure many of you did too, but it had a big problem. As you can see, it was totally dark. Hardly any sun came in. The grass didn't grow. There was nowhere to sunbathe, nowhere to sit, nothing. It had become a kind of jungle and microclimate, like a cave. The first thing I did was to remove the big pine tree that was there. Truthfully, I don't like cutting trees and such, but the problem with the pine is that it changes the pH and acidity of the soil and makes it so that nothing can grow around it. Honestly, I disliked it, so I shortened it. In the same way, I cut down other plants that were fine or were bad or were in the middle of the garden, obstructing everything. And then I would take care of designing my own garden with my own plants that I like. I only left the biggest one of all. Since it was in a place that wasn't bothersome, there in a little corner, I liked it a lot, and it must have been very old, but I did prune it since it had grown excessively. And it was already everywhere. The best thing is to uproot the trees. But this requires digging a huge hole. I recommend that you cut it right down to the ground, and then cut the trunk a few inches below the ground. I did it by digging a small hole on the sides and cutting it with a chainsaw, and then filling it with soil. You can also hit it with a pick or an axe. There are some trees that if you don't remove them entirely, they grow back, but this was not the case. Likewise, if you keep pulling them out as they grow, they will eventually die on their own. After I did this, the brightness of the garden and therefore the house changed dramatically. It was something completely different. Then I started to remodel the garden patio. I changed the floor, put a deck, placed the terrace staircase, a log pergola with a roof, smart light emitting diode lights and lamps and custom lamps, among other things. All of this I already showed you in the first part of this garden remodel. So I leave the link in the description or here in the corner in case you want to go see it. And continuing with the patio remodel, I wanted to put a table, but a nice and big table where several people can fit without spending much, since for some reason all of this is always very expensive. For that, I got 3 quebracho sleepers of very hard and resistant wood. I got them very cheap because they were from the trains that were taken out and then left as abandoned, just about $4 each. To bring them, I put all 3 in my car, a Fiat Uno that supports me in all the punishments I give it. To give you an idea, each of the sleepers weighs about 100 kilos, so having 3 of these in a Fiat Uno was almost a spectacle. Once at home, I had to assemble the table. First, I cut them because they were too long. My table was going to be approximately 2 meters long, and then I cut them in half. This way I managed to reduce the weight by half, otherwise it would be impossible to move it. To cut them in half, I first started by using a large grinder with a tungsten carbide disc. It's important not to cut wood with a grinder and tooth disc as it's extremely dangerous. This is basically risking your life. To finish, I continued cutting it with the chainsaw, and then I put a chisel in the middle where I could hit, and there it would open completely. But they had turned out very irregular. I made myself a guide to pass the router over it, but I realized it wasn't going to work as it broke on me, or it was going to take an eternity. I ended up getting a planer and put each of the boards through it until they were quite smooth and decent. I know many are thinking that yes, I spent a bit on materials, but I use a lot of tools that are very expensive, and in the end it ends up costing the same as buying a regular table. And yes, you're right, but on one hand, the tools are things that stay with you for a lifetime. And on the other hand, it's also true that we can rent any of these tools per day or simply have the wood cut at any sawmill for also very little money. For the base, I didn't complicate things too much. I bought a structural iron for about $20, cut it, and welded it in such a way to form squares that serve as legs. On one side, I made quite a few holes so I could later screw them into the boards. and so that none of them move, I painted them white with anti-rust paint. As you can see at the top, there were quite a few gaps due to the opening of the wood over the many years that had passed. I thought about filling them with epoxy resin, as it looks very nice, but I was going to need at least about 3 kilos. And a kilogram of epoxy resin was around $50. So ask yourself this question: is it worth spending $150 on epoxy resin for a table that cost us about $35 to make? No, I don't think it makes sense. I wanted to make nice lamps to hang from the tree, so I bought wooden profiles and started cutting and joining them into rectangles. I only joined them with a nail since they didn't need to support too much weight. The idea was to make just a kind of structure using a 1mm frosted acrylic plate, which is quite cheap. We can cut it into rectangles, and in each of the windows that were left from the wooden structure, I glued one of those squares of frosted plate. Now the bottom and top parts were missing. We can cover it with anything like a plastic plate, but I found it convenient to print 2 black PLA plastic covers. I printed them using Grill-On 3 filaments, which are the ones I always use because they never fail me. I put one on the bottom and one on the top, and finally passed a cable through the top cover. In this case, a braided cable with one of those bulbs that simulate being a flame, but I removed the plastic cover to achieve a better effect. To finish, I hung them from the tree, and to be able to control them at distances, I used one of these, a Wi-Fi switch that can be managed from the cell phone, Alexa, or from any smart home system. The truth is that I use these a lot for anything, even to water the grass that we are going to talk about later. This is how they turned out. I think they look very nice even though they don't illuminate much. They create an atmosphere. Another thing I did was remodel the deck. In my previous video, I showed you how I placed it, but I realized later that I had left them quite apart. So our things were falling into the pool that is underneath. Or the legs of the chair would get stuck, and on top of that, a lot of dirt was starting to gather. So I took them all out and put them back closer together, leaving less distance between each other. For that, I had to put 3 new woods and paint them. And finally, I gave it a good wash because everything had gotten quite dirty. And now, yes, we can start preparing the garden as such. First of all, when light started to come in, anything and any weed started to grow. That added to the fact that I had neglected it for a long time, made the garden a disaster. I pulled out all the weeds and threw out all the trash with a rake. I was taking everything out and bagging it. I also took out the grill that was on one of the walls and the cement floor that was in that place. The truth is that I didn't see any sense in that space and I never used it. I preferred to have more garden and green space. Another detail is that the grill was almost destroyed and hadn't been working for a while. In fact, it was so bad that with just a little push it fell over and was destroyed. I hit it with a 5-kilogram mallet to break it into pieces so I could put it in bags and throw it away. I also made sure to remove all the stones and debris I found there so that the grass would take hold well when I put it down. I chose to lay sod, which comes in ready-to-lay squares. It's super easy and provides instant grass without waiting for growth. First, I started to plow the earth, wet it, let it breathe, thinking it was like planting any plant. But don't do this, as the grass will end up all uneven afterwards, and on top of that, you'll work more. I use Bermuda grass as it is a very resistant grass, and it will withstand the winter and summer. Literally, the best way is to have the soil without stones or anything, all smooth, even if it's dry and hard. We start throwing the grass sod on top, placing them close together, and that's it. They complete the whole grass garden, and then, yes, they water it, but a lot. It has to be all flooded, so it ends up bonding well with the soil. And speaking of watering, I'm going to show you how I made my automated irrigation system. Also trying to spend as little as possible, since on the internet, irrigation systems cost a fortune. And I really don't know why, because it's something super simple. I had to solve a problem unique to my house, as the water comes with very low pressure. So I bought a peripheral pump, the cheapest one, since I only needed about 30 pounds per square inch of pressure in the hallway. I only have the laundry water taps. In one of them, I connected the hose that I was going to use to water. That hose goes into the pump to increase its pressure. And then to activate and deactivate the irrigation, I put an electric valve. I use this one because I honestly already had it, but we can easily use one of the clothes that costs much less. And it's much easier to put on. You simply cut the hose and that's it. You put the valve in the middle, and if your house has acceptable pressure, you also don't need the pump to control when it turns on and off. Use a different smart switch from those previously discussed. When the electrotrop activates, it will turn on the water pump, and it will turn on the valve so that it circulates. We can program these switches from the app to activate on their own whenever we want. I have it set to water for 10 minutes 3 times a day. Any watering can be used for watering. I prefer using this particular one. I've tried several irrigation systems, from the cheapest plastic to the most expensive brass. Surprisingly, the cheapest worked best for me. Others would get stuck, but with this one, you adjust it as desired. I covered the entire garden with it. This way, you can have an irrigation system for about $15 or $40 with the pump, which is still much cheaper than a conventional system. Plus, you need a pump for conventional systems too, so the savings are significant. Another thing I did was something to not be hot this summer. I saw this on a trip I made to Colombia and I loved them, so I bought them and brought them from there. They are mist generators that work like a water sprinkler, but it's so fine. Imagine that mine sprays water with a hole of 0.1 millimeters. So it generates like a mist that doesn't wet, but if you're underneath, it cools you down a lot. You only need the nozzles, a 120 pounds per square inch pump, the filter, and a high pressure hose. The pump takes water from any water source. For example, you can put a bucket with water or make any container with water and hose. Then I just arranged it where I wanted, about 1 meter apart from each other. And with the quick coupling system, we just put in the hose and it locks itself without leaks. And to handle them, guess what? Yes, I connected another smart plug to be able to turn on and off. Everything turned out great, and it doesn't matter how hot it gets if you have that on. You barely feel this pump like the irrigation one. I put it underneath the garden table, since it will never get wet there, and it also remains hidden from view, since there were numerous things to switch on and off. I did 2 things. The first is to place an Alexa under the garden table, and the second is a trick with an old tablet. This tablet had Android 4 and was useless for anything else. I bought 3 super cheap tablets that couldn't browse. I changed their operating system by installing Android 5 with a custom read-only memory. This can be done with almost any old tablet or cell phone by Googling the model of your device. Say the word read-only memory, and you will find a 100% guaranteed tutorial. Then I designed a very primitive website with buttons for the garden stuff, like watering, fogging, draining the pool, and the lights. And I made the tablet always display this page in full screen. For that, I used an app called Fully Kiosk that I had to pay for, and it cost me about €7. But it works perfectly. It even uses the camera to know when there is someone. And when you approach, it turns on by itself. And its function is to make the tablet only display the web in full screen all the time without anything else. So I put the tablet on one of the walls, and look, from a tablet that was useless, we made a multimedia service, let's say, that serves to turn everything on and off quickly and also looks nice. Taking advantage of the tree that I left, I hung a hammock from there. I used a 16 millimeter wide rope and some metal clamps to grab them. And going back to the garden, I planted a jasmine in a corner, in another corner an orange tree, and against the pergola a grapevine that at some point I hope will climb and cover everything. Against the wall that gets the most sun, I put a white plastic net so it wouldn't be too noticeable, and I planted 4 milk jasmines that give very beautiful flowers in spring. And my hope is that at some point they will cover that entire wall. And in the end, this is how my garden turned out when it was finished. I just need the heating system for the pool. But I'll show you that in the next video. And in the end, this is how everything is turning out. I also want you to see these before and after comparisons so you can see everything that has changed. I think it looks much cleaner than before and without so much chaos, let's say. And I'm also quite happy with the result, although the grass is starting to grow a lot, but obviously I'm already preparing something else for that. Thanks for watching my video, and if you liked it, don't forget to subscribe. Bye.